Should the government regulate AI? Would a national divorce decrease military interventionism? Do diversity, equity, and inclusion punitively target conservatives? We answer these questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we go through our social media feeds, we find interesting takes and we critique them or talk about why they are good and interesting and highlight some of the issues surrounding them and hopefully provide insightful commentary as we go. My name is Donald and I'm here with my co-host Britt. Before we get started, just a reminder to follow us on social media, give us a like, a share, subscription, all that good stuff helps us out. You can find us at Good Take, Bad Take Pod on Instagram and Good Bad Take Pod on YouTube and Twitter. Without further ado, let's go into our first take. And this one is a quote retweet. So we'll start with the original tweet being quoted, and then we'll move on to the quote tweet. So Michael Huang tweets, "Nice. 69% of US adults support a 6-month pause." And this is on AI development. Congratulations to a bunch of individuals, including Andrew Yang, notably, and Steve Wozniak, who had written on 50,000 plus signers of the open letter. So this was an open letter talking about how creators of AI should take a 6-month pause while there are sort of mores and norms considered and ethical standards developed for developers of AI and that type of thing. And Daniel Rubino, and I believe he writes for, I want to say like a Windows Central, I think. I could be mistaken, but it's a tech blog of some kind. This is never going to happen. So can we please come back to reality and talk about genuine efforts at regulating AI?
And
all right, what do you?
I'm not familiar with Daniel Rubino. Is he mean regulating as in like government regulation?
I believe so. Yes,
Okay.
I believe that is the implication. At least that's what my takeaway is here. So
yeah, so that's like, to me, obviously, for anyone that has listened to the show or knows either of us, like triggered red eyes at regulating
Yeah.
at government regulation. I think it's a bad take. Do you think the government is going to, one, regulate AI? And two, do they have the discernment to actually do that in a proper way? And then three, are they of the moral character to properly be the right people to regulate AI? And the answer is no to all of those, right? They're not going to be able to do any of that. But I'm actually not that opposed to like people thinking deeply about the consequences, right, of AI and stuff. And I remember someone close to me works at a pretty big tech company, and I remember there was some big political hubbub going on, and I was reading articles from this person who seemed crazy to me, to be honest with you. But turns out they were like a PhD in artificial intelligence, and they were on one of the teams developing, the moral frameworks for artificial intelligence at this company. And if anyone has ever like tried writing any code or anything, like you realize like how much of eventually you come down to, do I assign a 0 or a 1 to a decision on something, or how do I program and tell the computer to interpret something, and how is it going to build its models off of this 0 or 1, yes or no? And if you have someone that seems kind of crazy doing that and doesn't have the same morals as you, especially with something as powerful as AI, that's kind of terrifying. And to kind of hammer this point home, I saw a video, and I should have taken a picture of it and had it on here. But I saw a video of the chief innovation officer for the National Archives talking about how they want to use AI to rewrite sections of history that are kind of biased, right? So there is obviously not very much thought going into what's going on with AI. But if we think that the government is the best way to have a thoughtful discourse and regulation of what the moral implications of AI is, it's like you obviously haven't been watching the government for the past 150 years.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's one of those things where, the idea that the 6-month pause will never happen. I agree in that sense.
Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be a 6-month pause. Anyone who's worth their salt would see that 6-month pause and say, great, now my AI tech is going to completely outpace all of these other suckers who have paused. And I get that. But I also agree that the regulating AI through government, you do in that sense give de facto control to the most corrupt, long-lasting entity in the business of sort of these psyop and espionage type campaigns, which is, the exact kind of thing that you were describing. When you talk about rewriting history and when you talk about manipulating data, that's what government does, without the ability to directly control what AI can and can't do. And so it's kind of like one of those things where in the cybersecurity world, you want people to um, develop viruses in your own lab so that you can defend against them, right? You want people to find, your exploits, and you want to find these holes in your system so that you can, because cybersecurity is always an arms race, right? Of building up your defenses, building up, preventing yourself from the latest technology. And I think that AI is going to be in the same way, where if we let the government just regulate what you can and can't do, then we're in a very big disadvantage for AI that's going to be able to undo the ill effects of whatever AI uses the government has. Because let's make no mistake, even though the government is behind on things, they will find uses for AI. They will find ways to utilize it, and more often than not, it will be pernicious. And one of the best uses of AI will be to help, detect, oh, AI did this, and oh, this is not actually correct. And as soon as the people were starting to use, Chat GPT and stuff to do their homework, they immediately developed tech that detected, oh, this was most likely written by AI. And I think that's the only way that you can sort of help fight the unethical use of AI, is with more AI, really.
Yeah.
Because as much as you want to try to, put this 6-month pause or put government regulations, it's not going to happen. Technology keeps rolling forward, and advances in that can help good actors be empowered to do stuff, to roll back the negative content.
That's a fantastic point. That let's say that people didn't voluntarily do the 6-month pause or whatever. I have no problem if they choose to do that. I think it's to their detriment. But the genuine effort to regulate AI, government mandated for the United States innovators. It's like, what do you think all people all around the world are going to still be doing? They're still going to be innovating, and our people are still going to be 6 months behind. And that's kind of my point. It's like, even if you think there should be something done about AI, and there should be some sort of internal mechanism for regulating it, or there should be a bit bigger discussion about that. It's like the best person for it is not the government, right? They're going to do things like, hey, put a pause on everyone here doing it, whereas we would have probably been a balance, or there would have been good innovators, right, that are innovating against something that is bad. So anytime the government wants to regulate something, it usually makes the situation worse, right? Like, you think about prohibition, you think about the war on drugs, you think about anytime we got into any sort of military deal anywhere outside of our own country, it always becomes a big ugly mess. And it's usually worse. And then they claim that they need more regulation, right, to fix it. It's always so funny that these people, I mean, this was Trump's whole point against Joe Biden, was like, Joe Biden, you're complaining about all these financial, things, that the billionaires are making all these taxes and breaks and all this stuff. But you've been in the Senate for 50 years. Why didn't you fix it during your time there? And that's the exact point, right? Like, they always claim they need more regulation, and they always, most of the time, basically get it. And then they come back around saying, hey, I need more regulation later. And that just means they've never been able to fix the problem. It's something inherent to government to not be able to fix something.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's all I've got for that. So we'll move on to our next take. This one comes from Robert Murphy. Again, a quote retweet. So he's quote retweeting Jonathan Casey, who I believe is the founder of the classical liberal caucus of the Libertarian Party. So a little bit more of the blue-pilled, maybe, than some of the anarchist types. And Jonathan Casey tweets, working on debunking the myth that national divorce would solve the MIC/interventionism, and came across this gem. And then he posts a graph that shows military expenditure as a percentage of GDP from 1960 to 2021. And the curve has gone down significantly from about 6.5 to about 2. I think it's like somewhere in the 2.5 range, just depending on what year you're looking at. And Robert Murphy quote retweets this and says, okay, in the 1960s, there were apparently 165 sovereign countries in the world, and the most recent figure is 193. So Jonathan Casey has just provided more evidence that as the world splits into smaller jurisdictions, governments spend less on their militaries, secessionists for peace. What do you think about Bob Murphy's take there?
Yeah, Bob Murphy's take it's pretty cheeky, but it's good. I mean, it's using the same. It's not an argument that I would make, necessarily against this. but he's using the same logic that Jonathan Casey is using, which is like, oh, I see some correlation here. That must mean that you can't, have national divorce or whatever. But I mean, there is an element of truth, to Bob Murphy's deals that as countries get smaller and smaller, or as the number of actors get smaller and smaller, so does their amount of power. And because there's no big concentrated amount of power somewhere, people are able to have less and less need for force to be used. Likewise, as technology grows and things like that, the ability to defend yourself grows. With the ability to defend yourself increases with less and less real estate and less expenditure. So people, that's why we advocate for people being able to own their own arms. We also advocate for, if a group or country wanted any type of weapon, all the way up including a nuclear weapon, that's one of the things that like deters people, right? Like you could be a tiny country of 50 people, and you could be basically safe from invasion if you just had a nuclear bomb that you said, hey, if you invade here, we're going to set this off, right? Like that's going to be part of our protection of our country, and that's that threat. So that's those type of things ensure, when smaller individuals are better able to defend themselves, it ensures more freedom, it ensures more protection at less and less cost.
Yeah, I was going to say that, the military expenditure as a percentage of GDP is kind of an interesting way to measure it, right?
Sure.
Someone correctly responded to Bob, not even disagreeing with Bob, but just pointing out that this measurement is kind of silly to begin with, because it's like if if your GDP has grown, it has quadrupled, and you've increased the amount of bombings you've given in a year by 2, you're not down by 2 factors. You've doubled the amount of bombing you've done, right? But I do think Bob Murphy's take here is good, because he's kind of saying, well, like, even if you are going to if you're going to try to use this data for something, all it does is potentially point you in the complete opposite of the point you're making. Later in the thread, or in different part, Jonathan Casey says, well, I wasn't using this to make my point necessarily. It was just kind of an interesting thing that I found along the way, which, Bob Murphy's like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, I get that. You're just kind of like looking into this and then you highlight it. But it is funny when you pair the data with the point saying, I'm working on debunking this myth, and then you provide data that if anything shows that, your claim is less legitimate. Now, I think like a data example like this, I think you rightly pointed out, like you can twist numbers in certain ways. It's not going to be conclusive, but like these types of things aren't conclusive, but they can give credence to a certain point, right? So it's like, if you're going to bring up this data, you might want to make sure that the data at least indicates towards your desired outcome before you tweet it out in your post. So I think Bob's take is correct here, but I do want to point out too that even if you've increased the number of bombings, let's say, and for all intents and purposes, let's assume we're talking about sort of a larger nation like the United States. If it is, bombings, even if you've increased your total number of bombings, but you are decreasing the military expenditure as a percentage of GDP, that's still a positive trajectory overall. Now, it's bad that you've increased bombings. Obviously, we want to decrease that, but it also shows that less of the resources that are, the foundation of your country are reliant upon sort of this military industrial complex, which to me would indicate that, even if the pure number is going up, there's at least a chance for detangling yourself from this military fueled economy, right? Because if your GDP and your military expenditure are growing in tandem, then there's probably a link there at some point. It doesn't necessarily mean it, but it probably means that it's going to be harder for you to decouple yourself from a warfare state. Whereas if you are a nation with full of free trade and you're able to make peace with other countries through an established trade and make wealth in that way, then you're going to be less reliant on selling arms or taking over by conquest to acquire new GDP. So, it may not paint the full picture. It could mean that there were more bombings, even if even if the ratio of military expenditure to GDP went down. But it at least leads an open path to sort of the demilitarization of a nation state. Well, not fully necessarily, but you know what I mean. Removing the eternal warfare state, I would say.
Yep.
Okay. Our next take comes from Scott Adams, the controversial author of Dilbert Comics. And Scott tweets, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is essentially a hunting license for Democrats to identify and eliminate conservatives from the military, government, education, and workplace. You can prove me wrong with an example of a conservative heading up a DEI department. What do you think about this take?
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, it really hits it on the head, and I really like the argument that he's trying to make in terms of, like, if you could prove it to me, you prove me wrong by providing an example of conservative heading up a DEI department. And of course, you're never going to find one, because diversity, equity, inclusion is completely at odds with at least what conservatism is supposed to be in a lot of ways, which is merit based, right? It reminded me of, did you ever watch like the Joe Rogan episodes with Tim Pool and the Twitter folks?
I don't think I did, no.
Man, they're so interesting. They're kind of evergreen, and I would recommend going back to listen, even though what's Jack from Twitter, I can't remember his last name.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But Jack Dorsey and Vijaya God, who was like head of the legal department there, were on Joe Rogan, and Tim Pool basically said, hey, like, you guys have inherently left-wing bias within your company. And they're like, no, we don't. and he's like, yes, you do, because you disproportionately like choose and favor left-wing talking points, and you say that certain left-wing views that are not held by conservatives is hate speech. And they're like, well, give us an example of that. He's like, well, if someone says that a man can't be a woman, you guys consider that hate speech. And they're like, well, that is hate speech. And he's like, yeah, but that means you have left-wing bias. Like, no, we just have a ban on hate speech. And that's kind of like the entire point that Scott Adams is making, is that it's like, yeah, there's diversity, equity, inclusion is inherently a left-wing idea. And therefore, you're never going to be able to find a conservative heading up that department. If you can't find a conservative heading up the department, that means that it is a hunting license. It's something that is values being put onto conservatives that they don't actually have. They're forced to parrot these ideas. They're forced to even take actions and operate in such a way that adheres to these, or potentially face repercussions.
Yeah, I think that's true. And this is one of the reasons why I think more conservative types are being red pilled when it comes to particularly traditionally quote unquote conservative institutions, like maybe, oh, your alma mater when I went, it was okay or whatever, or the government, like, well, the military is okay, or corporate America, the big businesses that are, making very shady deals with the government. Well, they care about making money. They don't have time for this. And it's like, no, these, the DEI really is, I mean, not only is it's sort of the hunting license for the left broadly, like Scott Adams says, it's also a big flag that anyone can look to and see to say, okay, we now know that this institution is fundamentally left wing. It's fundamentally going to be existing in a way that promotes the power aggregation at the top, and a stripping of individual liberties, because we're going to start assigning values based on groups, based on whether or not you fall into the intersectional category of privileged or not, those kinds of things. So I think that this hunting license, it's becoming more and more transparent, because they needed to set up DEI as a non-political thing at first, right? Why would you be against inclusion? Why would you be against diversity? We want to hear from lots of different people. And so then you set up these institutions under this sort of benign guise of fairness and just promoting, which let's be clear, inclusion isn't necessarily a strength, but at its best, the idea of diversity and inclusion can be good, because you want to hear from a diverse perspectives that are valuable, right? You don't want to be pigeonholed into one way of thinking and miss on better opportunities or miss on potential problems because you're only seeing something from one direction. But also the diversity shouldn't just be for its own sake, like the way that these DEI centers have now been, and I would argue from their inception, have been promoting the idea of diversity and inclusion on merit is the kind of diversity you want. You want diversity of good ideas. You want a diversity of good thinking, not just diversity for its own sake. And so the problem is DEI, slips in with these like, oh, if you don't like this, you're just opposed to that. And then it just becomes an essentially purely political institution. So it sounds ridiculous to say, oh, well, every college needs to have the department of being liberal or the department of being communist. But that's essentially what you've done with the DEI Center. You've just blanketed the term. And they, again, for a few years, maybe acted more shallow, more benign, less proactive. But now that it's become this very accepted thing everywhere, they're on the attack more and more openly. But I would say they have been from the start.
Yeah, I had a coworker, great person, and really wanted to be a nice person and also a fantastic business person. And when we were creating this company, he's basically like, "Hey, we're going to adhere to the Netflix model, right? Like, we are going to say that we're not, a friends club. We're not here to have fun or anything. We're a professional team. Like, we are here to win. And if you're not pulling your weight or anything like that, like, we're going to have to figure out how to either get you up to speed really quickly, or you're going to have to go." Which is what you have to do when you're part of a startup or anything like that, because everyone is essential at that point. And then what was so interesting to me was that when we were doing some different presentations and pitching to people, he would say, he's like, "Oh, well, we just need to have more representation in our presentations and things like this. And, we need to be working to make sure that we're going to be hiring, people like this and such like that." I was like, dude, like, you just told me, and we just talked about how everyone needs to be able to pull their weight. It needs to be based on merit. We're a professional team. Like, how does that square? And he suddenly realized the cognitive dissonance, that he held. And the problem I think that happens is a lot of people are both smart, but they also want to be nice people, consider nice people. And so you have the DEI is a way for people to say, "Hey, this is how you are supposed to be nice." And if this is, say these things, do these things, and people are so busy, they've got so much going on in their life. They're not like you and I that care about politics and see what's going on in the broader culture. They care about living their lives. So they're like, okay, well, I'm going to get my feedback from the community around me that I somewhat trust about what being nice is. And I guess this is what it means to be nice, to parrot these DEI talking points, and therefore they do it. The problem is that once you run into actual, reality, those principles don't hold up, right? They can't hold up. You can't exist functioning purely off of that. And that's not to say that there isn't some value in being like, "Hey, we want to consider, potentially hiring from a place that may have some really huge talent that we've overlooked in some way."
Right.
I have someone close to my life that they found an amazing person with talent that was living in their mom's basement, that was working in a warehouse, but had won a ton of different competitions in technical stuff, and basically was able to, like, prove without any college degree or anything that they were on top of the herd in terms of technical ability. And they were able to find this person, through really unconventional means. That's awesome. But just because you need to fill some quota, like, you're not going to get that type of result. You're going to get the opposite of it.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? The diversity that is good is diversity based on merit, right? It's based on qualities other than whether or not you fall into this group. And the problem is the DEI movement is based on the Marxist ideas of critical race theory and those kinds of legal frameworks and stuff that boil down to you are determined by your skin color, by your status of privilege or not, or these artificial constructs that have nothing to do with either your worth as a human or your ability as a human. And so it's really harmful. And it's funny because I was listening to a conversation recently. I'm trying to remember. It might have been with on Dave Smith's podcast. I don't remember, but it was I was going back to listen to the episode with him and Oron, and I think Oron pointed out, or maybe it was Dave, one of the two pointed out that in previous days the elites have always found ways to expand beyond their normal base, because you need to you can't just get overwhelmingly outgrown by a massive populace. You need to find more people who are also elite. And the problem is our elites are doing it through DEI and these types of things that aren't based on merit, that aren't based on ability. So we're left with all these unimpressive elites that, they might be, I mean, at best, maybe they're nice people. Some of them aren't even that. They're a little more power hungry than that and vindictive. But they aren't being chosen based on their ability to actually do great things, which is because doing great things is a rare skill and it's difficult and it's hard. And so anyway, so these DEI centers are pretty terrible, I think I'll say. Okay, moving to our next take. This one comes from NPR, and this has to do with recent events, and so I even have somewhat of an update on this. So this one reads: in an extraordinary move, Tennessee's Republican-led House voted Thursday to expel 2 of 3 Democratic lawmakers who recently led a raucous protest from the House floor calling for gun law reforms. Representatives Justin Jones and Justin Pearson were both removed from the body with votes falling along party lines in a disciplinary measure that's only been used twice since the 1800s. The votes were 72-25 and 69-26 respectively. Together, they represent a combined constituency of about 130,000 people. Representative Gloria Johnson, a Democrat from Knoxville, who represents about 70,000 Tennesseans, escaped the same fate by a single vote with a final count of 65-30. Following the failed vote, Johnson was asked by reporters if she thought there was a reason she'd had a different outcome. "I'll answer your question," she said. "It might have had to do with the color of our skin." Both Jones and Pearson are black, and Johnson is white. What do you think about this take?
Well, what's the update? Or are you waiting for me to?
Yeah, the update just being that those people have responded a little bit. So I want to hear your take just from this first.
Yeah. To be clear, I'm not terribly familiar. When they say expel, does that mean they're like not part of the house anymore?
It means they're just booted off the premise, I believe.
Okay.
I could be mistaken. I'm not sure how
for how long.
Yeah, I don't know what the full expulsion is, but I guess more the bigger question to me has to do just with the sort of the purported reasoning for all of this going down.
I mean, I don't know if it has to necessarily do. I think it's a bad take anytime you kind of do that, but like. She almost was expelled too, so I think it has more to do with the fact that you led protesters onto the House floor, calling for gun law reforms. From my personal standpoint, right? Like, I mean, when I first read this, I wanted to do that. This is what democracy looks like, because this is a majority voting, to use their chant against them. But personally, I wish that more people were expelled or ostracized for trying to take away inerrant rights. I think that's a good thing in society in general for us to do that to people. I'm not saying be violent or overly nasty, but I do think they should be ostracized in a way that's like, hey, that idea is dumb and bad, and we're not going to tolerate it here, and we even view it as evil. Especially and from my understanding, it was actually pretty. They say raucous, but I believe there was actually a little bit of violence between the people and cops and stuff like that as well. And, the NPR, the same people calling out the January 6th protest. Yeah. I mean, you would think they would have something to say, if they're going to be somewhat consistent about this. But as Twitter now says, they are state-run media. So
yeah. So I'm just confirming that the expulsion is literally just escorting them off the premise.
Oh, okay, just for the day.
Yeah, literally just taking them out of the.
Oh, this is it's a nothing burger then.
Yeah, it really is. The thing that makes me laugh is they're immediately jumping to it has to do with the color of her skin. But it's like, also she's the only woman there. Why did it immediately jump to the fact that she's white and not a woman?
Yeah,
because
her name's not Justin.
Yeah, right. And it's because that's not helpful to the narrative that they want to set. They really want to make sure that it's all being played on their terms. And the thing is, I wasn't there. I haven't seen like footage directly or anything like that. So, I could be wrong about this. So feel free to I'm not saying this is the reason, but there's, again, a lot more reasons for something than just, it has to do with the color of the skin. Generally speaking, men tend to be a little bit more raucous and loud and, things like that than women do. And maybe she was up there in the exact same way. Or, I don't know the history of this, but another very plausible explanation is maybe she's been a member of the House longer than they have. And she has friends, she's worked in bipartisan ways. And so there were 5 Republican lawmakers who were like, look, I know she's up in arms about this, but like, I respect her, so I'm not going to do that. Like, there's a million reasons why, but they immediately always want, and she immediately, jumped to the race thing. And that's not, And the other funny thing about this is they're talking about how this was an incredible measure, only used twice since that time. The both of the people who got voted out have admitted that they broke the official decorum. They broke the rules and then were
Yeah.
punished for the rules. So they're acting like this. It's crazy, and it's extraordinary measure that they kicked them out. They broke the rules, and it was in a disruptive way. I don't know what more they want.
Yeah, and to act to hammer that point home, like she says it might have to do with the color of your skin. Dude, you lost. I mean, not you lost. You were failed to be expelled by one vote. So
Yeah.
it's
Well,
not like
five.
it was
Oh,
five.
well, there were 5 votes that flipped. So yeah.
Yeah, but
It
she
was
escaped the
one
fate
vote.
by a single vote, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so I see what you're saying. Yeah, so five people or whatever. It's like no, basically everyone had a 65 of the 72 or whatever that voted for Justin Jones still thought the same way about you as they thought about Justin Jones and Justin
Yeah.
Pearson. So no, it probably doesn't have to. I mean, maybe it has the one vote that decided to not send you expel you from there. Maybe it had something to do with your skin color, but for the majority of everyone, I mean, they're pretty consistent regardless of whether you're a man, woman, or your name was Justin.
Yep.
So
Exactly right. Exactly right. Okay. And then our final take, I believe, here comes from Rand Paul, who tweets, "To haters of capitalism, know this. In 1956, it took 217 hours of work at average blue collar wages to buy a refrigerator. Today, it takes 16 hours." What do you think about that?
it's a fantastic take. I mean, I would expect nothing less than from Rand Paul, obviously. Yeah, and that's people don't realize. Like we think about. You've watched the movie Elf, right?
Yeah.
Like I always think about this scene when I bought a huge TV when we moved into our new house, and I bought it for a couple $100s. Like it was very cheap, right? And I think about Elf when the little midget guy comes in and he's bragging about how rich he is. He's like, "I've got 5 houses, and each of them has a 32-inch plasma screen, flat screen TV in them." And I think about that now because back in 2002 or whenever that movie released, like that was a big deal. And now it's like I could get a 32-inch, really nice TV that's flat screen, probably nicer than his TV for like $60 if I wanted to on Craigslist.
Yeah.
And that it just shows you like how much living standard has improved, right? Capitalism makes absolute crazy luxuries super affordable and easy to get for the working class. And that's, I mean, as Rand Paul says, 16 hours to have something to preserve your food. That is a huge thing.
It's funny because this makes me think of it's kind of like the opposite of the take we had last episode with the guy making the
The rubber things,
the rubber
yeah.
gasket deals. Yeah. um it's it is pretty funny that people fail to see that overall, that this kind of progress is a direct result of capitalism, right? Like you look at even places like say China, where you aren't really afforded the same kind of freedom in many ways, and it's still a very authoritarian country in so many respects. But at a certain point their economics got so bad that they had to liberate their markets a little bit. They had to open them up because it was like they were clamping down so hard. They were like, well, crap, if we keep doing this, then we literally won't be able to survive, essentially. And so even in the most sort of illiberal places like that, they need the lifeline of capitalism to to inject some sort of flow of goods and services and trades, because the more that people can make things, the more that you can produce value, the higher the purchasing power people have to afford more expensive things, and then as a result those things lower in price because they are more attainable and more acquirable based on the total net value that's in your economy. So I think it's a great take from Rand, and it's, I don't know, it's pretty it's pretty self-explanatory there. Although a lot of people are going to come in with the actually correlation does not equal causation, which again is true, but is also not necessarily indicative in this case of any of, you wouldn't look at this and say this is the only reason why we can prove capitalism, but it's a strong argument when you look at all the facts of the matter.
Well, yeah, and that's like people a lot of times will confuse capitalism with like corporatism, and we've talked
Yeah.
about this a lot on the show. Yeah, I had a buddy, and we were applying for funding from the NSF, the National Seed Fund. Basically, they fund like innovators and stuff like that. And basically, like we had to write up this whole grant proposal and all this stuff about how our technology was going to help things. Um, and we got denied. And then someone told us, said, "Hey, like you should have just paid this other company 50 grand. They would have written it for you, and they guarantee that you're going to get funding." And it's because all the people on their board know all the people on the NSF board.
Yeah.
And my buddy's like, he's like, well, that's just capitalism for you. I was like, no, it's not. That's not capitalism. That is corporatism. Like that is people using their connections with government to reap unjust gains. They haven't actually provided any value. Capitalism is taking capital that has been saved up, reinvesting it so that you can make a profit. And a lot of times to make a profit, you need a competitive edge. And the best competitive edge you can have is have the best product for the cheapest price, right? So that's what all companies are always trying to go for, is have the best product at the cheapest price for the niche that they're trying to target, right? So that there's kind of those are the three dimensions of how you attack a different type of market. But anyways, like, of course, we know that the refrigerator that you buy for 16 hours worth of wages today, it's not going to be as good, right? But is it better than having no refrigerator? It's like, yes, it absolutely is. And it can get you by. It's in the same way that I think about like a Big Mac at McDonald's, right? Like a Big Mac, I don't know what it costs now today because I don't eat at McDonald's. But, it's like something like $8 or $9, right? For the sandwich alone. Here in Seattle, our minimum wage, depending on where you're at, is $15 an hour. So basically, you can work almost an hour, 2 hours, and you can buy a whole day's worth of food for that much in terms of calories. They're not the best calories around, but if you went and offered a Big Mac to someone that was a peasant working in the fields on starvation wages and barely able to eat any rice or anything like that, if you offered them a Big Mac, they'd be pretty happy, right? Their life would improve quite a bit. And then if you told them, said, hey, like you could work a 16th of what you're working today and you could get this, their mind would just be completely blown, right? So reinvestment of capital, reinvestment into innovation, making better goods for cheaper prices always yields these type of results. It's only when the government steps in and provides perverse incentives that weird things happen.
Right. And to even bolster that point further, look at the industries where you have this kind of decrease in cost and decrease in needed hours to afford, and then compare that with sectors that this kind of drastic decrease hasn't happened, and it's all sectors that the government is firmly involved in, right? You look at education, you look at healthcare. These things are, these particular ones, I know there's a couple others, are sectors where the government interests are so heavily intertwined, and it's the least free market sectors we have in the US, and the decreases from 217 hours of work in 1956 to 16 hours have not decreased in the same way. Like, look at even university costs have just skyrocketed, and what happened there? Oh, the government set up all these institutions and grants to quote unquote make college affordable, and guess what it did? It did the complete opposite. So everywhere that you have private innovators who need to move units, who need to sell things, who need to invest and create better products, you have a decreasing in the costs associated with that, and you have an increase in accessibility. With the government, even if you have increased accessibility, it's always at way higher of a cost. And again, is it really that much more accessible for a college student, say, to take out a loan and end up paying that for the next 50 years of their life? If you saw the costs up front, it would probably be just as inaccessible as, a fridge back in 1956.
Yeah.
The only difference is you've deceived them into going now. So you can say, look at all these people going to college. Isn't that wonderful and great? And a lot of the time, they're not even getting any real value out of it due to the DEI centers getting set up and teaching maybe some less than useful skills. All right. And with that, I think that's our show. So thank you guys so much for listening. So be sure to give us a like and a share and a comment if you enjoyed the episode. Give us any bad takes or good takes that you find if you want us to weigh in. And we'll catch you on the next one.